Hi, this is Pat Moorhead with More Insights and Strategy, and we are here for another More Insights and Strategy Insider podcast. And we are here with Dell Technologies' Varun Chhabra, SVP of Dell Product Marketing. How are you, Varun?
I'm great, Pat. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, so hey, on this Insider, we have the most influential people and companies, and guess what? You are one of those, but I know everybody can read what your title is, but maybe we start out with what your job is and what your focus is.
Oh, sure. So I've been at Dell Technologies now this is my seventh year. I've had an amazing time the last 7 years. My current job is I lead product marketing for a lot of Dell's strategic growth areas. So things like, as a service in cloud, edge, and telecom, as well as a few other teams. So it's a lot of fun. Keeps me very busy and engaged and excited because we get to deal with we're at the forefront of what's happening with technology in the world, and what more can you ask for in tech than to have a
Yeah,
job?
well, I mean, and Dell's growth areas. You've got the growth areas on the right. That's pretty much Dell's big growth areas. So super exciting. And listen, we've talked a couple times
Mhm.
offline. I'm a hardcore product person at my
I
core,
know.
and so I love products to get excited about it. So I'll try to
Well,
temper it.
I follow you on Twitter, and whenever I read your updates on microprocessors and what's happening in the world, I'm always reminded you are deep,
Yeah.
which is great.
So just to set the stage, so we're going to talk multi-cloud now, and
Right.
what's so was such a positive thing is kind of where we've come as an industry. I mean, 10 years ago, my firm, More Insights and Strategy, was one of the first firms to talk about
I remember. Yeah.
the private cloud. Now, I put, I rode the wrong horse, which was OpenStack, but I think everybody did at the time. But there were people who were actually questioning whether there would be any on-prem type of infrastructure.
Yeah.
And then 3 years ago, even the cloud native folks all now have hybrid cloud offerings, which is great. Now we can all agree that we have a hybrid world, but there is still a little bit of debate, which we're going to talk about, which is a little nuance on hybrid cloud called multi-cloud.
Yep.
And I think maybe a good place to start is what is the current state of the union on businesses building their multi-cloud environments?
Yeah. It's look, it's a really fascinating space. We could probably spend an hour debating what even multi-cloud means, because it means different things to different people, as you know probably better than I do. But at the core of it's my belief, and I think our company's belief, that this is all grounded in a couple of very um, trends that are hard to argue with. One is the growth of data, right? So data is being created in more places than ever before as technology kind of gets spread out further and further, and we definitely feel like that trend is only going to get more distributed and more data, distributed data creation. And as data is getting created in all these different places, the traditional models of kind of server and client, centralized compute and data processing, where data processing should live, I think those assumptions are getting challenged all the time. There certainly is no one size fits all, and when we talk to customers, what we hear is they're increasingly looking at their technology estate across different locations, right? It's not just one public cloud anymore. In fact, depending on what research you look at, most large customers are using 4 to 5 different public cloud environments. They may be environments with same public cloud providers, but different environments, different applications. Certainly a huge heterogeneity of public cloud providers and public cloud solutions that single customers are using, as well as you were mentioning, their on-prem environment hasn't necessarily gone anywhere, right? There's workloads running there. There's tons of data, a lot of data gravity there, and colo is becoming another increasingly important location, if you will, for customers. And as I was implying, with kind of the rise of distributed computing and more distributed locations than ever before, it's the E word, edge, right? Which is,
Yeah.
I think what we find is that customers are really struggling with how do we maintain this estate, and this estate is getting more complex, in some ways more siloed than ever before. And what they know for sure, though, is that they love the experience of public cloud, right? Certain things about public cloud experience, like
Right.
being able to, spin resources up on demand, almost infinite scaling, access to kind of amazing developer services at the touch of a, literally at a swipe of a credit card, if you will. They want that same those aspects of that public cloud experience everywhere they want to run technology. So, it is an area that's rife for debate, but our perspective is multi-cloud really encompasses all of this estate, right? Because it's not just multiple public clouds. It's not just some public clouds interacting with an on-prem private cloud data center. It's really across multiple public clouds, across on-prem data centers, colo facilities, and increasingly the edge. This entire estate to us is multi-cloud, because customers really, what I think they want is they want that complexity to go away. They want a simple operating model. They want to be able to do API-driven provisioning of infrastructure and have it be consistent across all these environments. And as you know, we're not there at all, right? We're far away from that reality.
Yeah, we are. It's a challenge. I mean, essentially duplicating DevOps, networking, security, trying to go through that. But the great part is the industry, people like Dell are working hard and investing a lot to make that a lot easier. One aspect that I think is interesting that I've heard you talk about is this notion of multi-cloud by default versus multi-cloud by design. Can you do the double click on what this means and why it's important?
Yeah, I'm so glad you teed that up. Like it really, the world that I was describing, which exists today, which is that customers find themselves because of how workloads evolve and where data is sitting and the challenges in moving data, maybe other limitations around being able to move infrastructure to the places where data is being created, is that there is a lot of what we call multi-cloud by default, which is you're in multiple worlds, in multiple cloud environments, whether they're on-prem or off-prem, but it's not necessarily working cohesively together. It's not full potential. There's still a lot of silos, lack of cost transparency, differences in how you do costs and billing across different environments, right? OpEx versus CapEx in some situations,
right.
Different, as you were saying, different data security, data governance models, skill gaps. I mean, that's something that it's so interesting, especially as we talk about multi-cloud. The amount of stress that skill gaps are creating for our customers is becoming more and more prominent. The ability to be able to hire people, whether it's in your ops teams, your IT teams, even developers, that can really keep up with the insane breadth of innovation, right? Different tool sets.
Right.
To us, all of that is complex. There's a lot of silos. That is multi-cloud by default. You're almost kind of finding yourself in a multi-cloud world that wasn't necessarily designed to work together. So multi-cloud by design, by distinction, is taking the best parts of that experience, the access to quick provisioning, on-demand scaling, access to services, self-healing infrastructure, maybe in certain situations where it makes sense as well, right? API-driven, automation, all of that stuff that people like about quote unquote the cloud experience, and have that be available consistently so that you're using the same tool sets, similar approach to data security and governance. Just that to us is all of these things, kind of a cloud experience delivered seamlessly wherever customers are running, our organizations are running technology or infrastructure and applications. To us, that's what multi-cloud by design actually means.
Yeah, it's funny. When we were talking in the green room about this, the first thing that popped in my head was multi-cloud by default was something that happens to you and it's not planned.
Exactly.
And multi-cloud by design is actually designing with this in mind. And it's interesting. I don't mean this negatively when I say that typically IT doesn't lead generations of new technology inside of organizations. Is typically the lines of businesses. But what IT does do is they get the sprawl, they get that under control, right? After the line of businesses have done this, and it's almost like line of businesses did this in terms of default. And IT is doing it now, multi-cloud by design, and exactly, or they need to, because every major transition in IT history has gone through this. Whether it's mini computers, PCs, smartphones, everything. So, I like your words better, but that's the first thing that popped in.
No,
into my mind.
You're totally right. In fact, it kind of just this anecdote that I hear very commonly is. when we talk to IT stakeholders, for example, in our customer scenario, the specifics are different, but very often this is not an uncommon story. Is basically, hey, so and so department spun up a website because they wanted to run a promotion, and guess what? Their promotion was super successful, and now we've got like tons of visitors to that website. But at some point in time, the line of business decides, hey, this is it was fine when it was a skunkworks thing. Now I'm having to manage this. I'm spending an increasing amount of organizational attention and energy on maintaining that infrastructure, making sure it doesn't go down, making sure that there isn't any data leaks and security. And then they basically go to IT and say, hey, dude, can you take care of this for us? Right? So you can imagine IT basically almost incorporating thousands of experiences like this across the organization. That's where the consistency becomes so important, right?
For sure. One of the conversations or elements that is driving this multi-cloud conversation is data growth and gravity. Now, 5, 6, 7 years ago, I had slides, you had slides about data growth. It was typically consumer hyperscale companies and social media or doing that. But today, these are enterprise, these are Fortune 500 businesses in verticals like transportation, life sciences, manufacturing, retail, that it's having an impact. So how is this data growth and gravity impacting the multi-cloud conversation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And in fact, I'd argue there isn't any industry that isn't touched by this, right? And I'll just say it. I mean, it's the obvious thing, but the pandemic has only accelerated that trend, right? The increasing digitization of businesses, which is already happening before, right? But the acceleration that we're seeing over the last few years is just it's just getting there faster than we thought it would, right? And certainly even industries that would have been seen as laggards are now scrambling to catch up. And a large part of digitization, as you know, Pat, is the core tenet of that is the increase of data. Data being the digital footprint, if you will, of any business activity, right? So I'd say even 5 years ago, if you look at the amount of data that existed, on-prem, right, that workloads were really processing and using, and then you had another growing set of kind of going center of gravity with public cloud workloads. Now, if you fast forward 5 years now, you still have that one center of gravity with on-prem data centers. There's now many centers of gravities depending on where your workloads are running across different public clouds. And guess what? There's you can't call it a center of gravity because it's really distributed. But if you think about all of the common edge use cases, right?
Yeah.
Like it may not be large amounts of data that's like, let's just take a large retail chain like Target or Walmart, right? They have thousands of stores, right? And the amount of data being created in each store may not be massive by itself, but it all adds up, right? And increasingly what we find is the bottleneck is the cost of actually transporting the data. And that's actually one of the things that I think makes the multi-cloud world so fascinating, right? Because now as a cloud architect, you're for one of these large companies, you're having to start thinking about, okay, what's the right balance of processing data at its source, right? How much data how much data do we keep in those locations? How much do we discard? What does the archive policy look like? How much do you transport over the wire for, maybe more batch processing analytics models and AI and ML and things like that? It is not easy, right? If you think about a banking application or just banks with many retail locations or logistic firms, like you said, healthcare facilities where people have thousands of hospitals running all across the board. So in a world where the ability to move data is increasingly costly and more cost prohibitive than ever before, what's the right balance? And I think that also drives what we see is it drives a lot of decisions about where to place compute, where applications should be running, and that challenge, basically that makes the world of multi-cloud more distributed than ever. And that's why I feel, we feel very strongly as a company that trend is going to get more and more distributed. And that's one big reason why multi-cloud, in our opinion, needs to consider the edge as well, not just kind of more traditional data-centric models, data center type models. And if you think about Dell, The one thing most customers will say, like PC servers and data, right? Like our heritage in storage and data protection, data is really part of our DNA at Dell. We have customers rely on us for enterprise grade data and storage capabilities, and I think that what they're coming to us now is, of course, those enterprise grade data services provided in wherever data is being created and stored, but also an ability to be able to manage it consistently across all of these things, right? And now, in a world where, especially if you start thinking of public cloud, Dell's hardware is not going to run in every single one of those locations. We think it's going to, advantage position to run in the edge, in data centers, colo facilities. But especially as we think about extending that consistent experience to public cloud, we've got to increasingly think about, delivering some of this IP that has traditionally been kind of packaged up as part of a hardware software solution, infrastructure solution, as just a software and services. And that's what you see with Apex. We've been doing that over the last year or two. And then increasingly, we just had a launch in January. We're starting to focus on delivering this IP as either as software that you could run in different locations, some of which would be on Dell hardware, some of it may not. And then also as services, where basically customers are signing up for outcomes and then leaving it up to Dell or our ecosystem to really provide those managed capabilities so that they can focus on the workloads and the business insights and kind of making business decisions as part of that. So a long way of saying that, all of that is rooted in the notion of data creation, data storage, and the gravity of kind of wherever that data exists.
Yeah, and I do appreciate you acknowledging that there will always be a world where it does make sense to have consolidated data to do maybe things like training of big data sets. And it's interesting. I get challenged a lot on this notion. I've never been a public cloud denier. In fact, I used to deliver processors to the largest cloud company that exists out there. I know it's out there, but I'm also a realist and understanding that you can't wave a wand and everything be perfect with just one operating model. I mean, if we all believe that everything should be consolidated, we would all be using 3270 tubes connected to a giant mainframe.
Yes.
And that's the financial environment I started my career in. But guess what? This notion of processing the data at the place where it's created or captured.
For the right use case, exactly.
Yeah, for the right use case, it makes sense. For planet scale databases that are required to train for analytics or machine learning, there's absolutely going to be a need for that. And I'm glad you acknowledge the price of moving that data. There are no free lunches out there. Egress charges can sometimes be 30 to 40% of the cost of an application.
Yes, I agree. Look, I think you're absolutely right. The balance between real-time decision making, which is where kind of analysis on the source makes sense, and the interrelation of that and kind of the power of batch analytics, machine learning, deep learning that can actually make those real-time algorithms better. It's not going away. I think that's a very important thing. But the business needs really dictate what the balance between those are. Right? Like if you're someone like Uber, you've got to make decisions on the fly. If you're a retail, if you're a retail company and you're trying to figure out like what you want to drive, let's say you're a grocery provider and a grocery outlet, and you have stuff that's gonna, over time gonna start, perishable stuff. You've got to make pricing decisions to kind of really move inventory. Often those decisions need to be made real time. They're obviously informed by batch analytics, machine learning, deep learning that happen in centralized locations. But it's that interplay between the two that I don't think is going to go away.
Yeah, we'll discuss federated learning the next time you're on the podcast. But that kind of throws this interesting, doing training at the edge. But we'll talk about that in the next podcast. So Dell is working hard to make this simpler for people to go across the entire estate. Whether it's on-prem, whether it's colo, whether it's on the edge, whether it's in the public cloud. But there are obstacles. There are business obstacles across multiple environments and applications. I talked a little bit about the networking and the security, but there are business obstacles of this. Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a if you really think about what the multi-cloud challenges kind of, or the obstacles or complexity really sprawl from, it's data, which we just talked about in the previous question, and applications, right? It's maybe a very overly simplistic model of looking at it, but I think it makes for a easy conversation tool. If you talk about applications, I think what we're seeing is there is at the end of the day, I think applications, they chase the data, right? Like you were talking about referencing or analytics at the edge. Yes, and if there is going to be a need for real-time analysis at the source, ultimately the thing that's going to do it is going to be an application, right? So what we're seeing right now is an amazing heterogeneity of application stacks, right? In terms of where they run, what infrastructure they consume, what the expectations are in terms of kind of real time versus batch amount of data they're going to process, where they're going to run this, and what you're seeing, I think more than data, I think we are very much at the forefront on the application side of that heterogeneity. I would posit to you that we're still going to be, over the next few years, in a place where this heterogeneity is going to continue to explode before maybe it consolidates, right? Even if you look at what Dell's been doing, sometimes people will say, "Oh, you've been doing a lot of work with VMware," and yes, we have, right? For both traditional applications and modern applications, we've got a great relationship with VMware, and we're going to continue to work with them. But that's not the only place where there is kind of innovation that's happening, right? If you look at Amazon, you look at Google, Azure, a lot of the hyperscalers are creating application frameworks and stacks that they have ambitions for customers to be able to run in different locations outside of their own walled gardens, if you will, right? So if you just take Google Anthos, for example, or Amazon EKS Anywhere, these are things these are innovations that you're starting to see over the last year or so. One of the best kept secrets, I'd say, within Dell at least, is people don't realize we're working very, very closely with all of these application stack providers, right? So AWS, Google, Red Hat, VMware, these are all incredibly important partners to us. And the reason why we're doing it is because that's what customers are asking us, right? Customers are trying out all kinds of new application paradigms, both from a development perspective as well as running them. But as you can imagine, the frameworks for all of these are different. The tool sets are different. The runtimes are different. How they look at data security is different. How everything about managing these applications are an extension of the walled gardens in many cases that many of these hyperscalers are creating, right? So the challenges with applications then are, one again of silos, of skill gaps, and I think while the answers here are a little bit less clear, it's very clear that over time, what customers want is some level of cohesion, consistency in being able to deploy and maintain applications on these different frameworks without having to do kind of complete up and down rewiring of the stack and using completely different management stacks. So that's the thing that I think we're very early in the journey on, but it really brings home 2 points for me. One is the importance of the ecosystem, right? In this environment, there is no any vendor who says to a customer, "Hey, just stick with our walled garden or our ecosystem," I think is basically going through a self-serving kind of a approach. The reality is, it's going to take a really cohesive ecosystem to be able to provide all of the end-to-end capabilities that customers need. No one vendor, no matter how large and dominant they may seem, is going to be able to solve all of those challenges and needs for customers on the application front. And I think that's why it's very important to us as Dell. We've been saying we want to be that cloud ecosystem champion for our customers that really works with different parts. Could be hyperscalers, could be application providers, could be PaaS providers, could be even ISVs as they deliver software as a service solutions. We want to work with everybody. Of course, even services or services partners, CSPs. It's the entire gamut. We think it's this heterogeneity of the multi-cloud world today is really crying out for an ecosystem that really works together, and we want to be one of those ecosystem champions that really advocates for that cohesive ecosystem that works together on the customer's behalf. So, what's happening in the application space is basically a prime example of that need.
And by the way, the starting line is different too, whether you look at traditional on-premise vendors
Yes.
and cloud native, right? Cloud native had about a 5 to 7 year jump on the industry as on-prem was working with OpenStack and trying to make that happen. But when it comes to hybrid cloud solutions, I really believe that vendors like Dell actually have the lead on the cloud native folks. And listen, I'm equal opportunity industry analyst, and I'm watching this all, but I just look at the depth of this, and maybe it's motivation. I don't know, but the reality is that companies like Dell, you're ahead of the game here, and I think and you still have a lot to develop, but customers want this, right? They want this,
and I think I also find that it's, trust is so important in this world, right? Whenever like as you've seen with every epoch of IT transitions, and I think with multi-cloud we are in the midst of another epoch. The customers are looking for help with navigating those transitions. And look, we think that it's very important for our customers to understand that no matter what their need is, we're going to support them. We don't know their business as well as they do. Our job, at Dell, we feel very strongly is to support the customers wherever they are. Everybody's in a different stage of the journey. Everybody's got a completely different footprint. There isn't a one size fits all. That's not the approach here, right? So I think hopefully the fact that we're willing to advocate for whatever customers want to do is going to help build trust with customers and really. I'm biased, obviously, but I think Dell is one of those vendors that customers are looking to with a slightly more, that they feel we have a slightly more neutral perspective when it comes to figuring out what public cloud should I use? How should I think about, on-prem versus core versus edge? Because I genuinely believe we can help them wherever they are.
So let's talk about developers. Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
Well, I'm a former Microsoft employee, so that always brings a smile to my face.
How does multi-cloud either impact or drive developer velocity? Speed it up? Does it slow it down? What should we be thinking about in relation to multi-cloud and developers?
It's so funny. I'm also a former developer. I used to develop many labs. I call myself a lab software developer. I used to develop 15 to 20 years ago when I came out of college. I probably couldn't recognize any of the. It was before Ruby on Rails. It's before all of the things that people use these days. But in some ways, it seems to me that it's the best of times to be a developer because you have access to if you just look at just the catalog of any hyperscaler. Just unbelievable how much innovation is available, and kind of the developer in me is like, it could be so easy to write code because I can spin up these these tasks at the click of an API call, right? But at the same time, I also think that it might just also be a really tough time to be a developer because the choice, we always know in IT, right? It's a trade-off between choice and efficiency, and there's so much to choose from. If you even look at one hyperscaler, but if you look across all of the hyperscalers, on-prem frameworks, PaaS providers, it's incredible amount of complexity. And what we find, which I think is a little counterintuitive, is developers are spending much less time actually writing code than they are doing other administrative tasks and navigating through the complexity of different frameworks, where these frameworks actually how do you deliver those frameworks across these different locations or applications across different locations? There's differences in how a container stack's going to work at the edge versus in a hyperscaler's data center versus in a customer's own data center. Developers are having to spend an increasing amount of time actually getting involved with that. So I think there is a lot of friction in the system. And what we've seen over the last 5, 10, 15 years is that the more productive developers are in a digital economy, the greater the velocity is of delivering kind of innovation, services, applications, the greater the business impact. There is a direct correlation there. So it's no surprise that most customers are telling us, hey, you've got to help us unlock some of this friction or reduce some of this friction and unlock the potential of the developers. And Dell's not some, we've not traditionally been directly talking to developers. We think with some of the work we're doing, with some of the announcements we've made, we hope that over time that's going to change. But in the near future, our efforts are very focused on enabling IT teams, IT ops teams specifically, really accelerate the adoption of DevOps initiatives, right? So anything that IT teams are doing to drive, could be things like infrastructure as a code, could be more adoption of container-based architectures, or making some of those things available to their end developers. Efforts that IT teams are doing to make their developers more productive, we want to support them, right? So we talked a little bit about what's happening on the application front, and I think some of that bleeds into this area as well. Like we're partnering with a broad ecosystem, right? If customers want to build applications on Amazon EKS Anywhere, on Google Anthos, on Azure's Kubernetes stack, on Red Hat or VMware or even SUSE, we've been busy partnering over the last many months or few years to really help make that available for our we are validating those stacks onto our platforms, making sure that customers understand that if they were to use this, they were to use those stacks on our platforms, they can rely on us for whether it's basic support or even value added services to help them through that journey. So I think that while this is not an audience that I'm sure developers don't get up in the morning thinking about Dell as the main vendor, we are very optimistic and confident that is going to change over time, and we know that it has to, because it's such a core part of our customers' challenges, and we can't help our customers be successful if we're not helping them make their developers more productive.
One thing that I'm keeping a pulse on related to developers and multi-cloud is this notion of, which API do I use? Do I use an API that might be cheaper and higher performance, but locks me into a certain vendor for something, or do I use something that is transportable across multiple environments? So it's interesting. I think I know which way the developers would choose, but the business units I don't think want to get locked into something. But it's something I'm watching, and it's funny. I hear on the cloud native folks are like, why use something that's lowest common denominator?
Yep, it's
for this. But this is a
canonical challenge. Yeah, it's the defining debate of multi-cloud, right? If you will, across developers, across applications, across data. I completely agree with you. I honestly don't have the right answer on that. I mean, I suspect I know there's a broad spectrum of opinions, but you're right. That is a core issue as we think about business units and the constituents that they represent, as well as IT, right? That's a classic tension, if you will. Yeah.
Right. So we're closing in on our last question that I had for you. And quite frankly, this could have been the first question, or this could have been the last question. Mm-hmm. And I picked it as the last. I'd love to hear your take on Dell Technologies' multi-cloud vision. What can we expect about the future? What should we be looking for in relation to Dell?
Yeah, I think Pat, it's a very fair question. Rather than get into specific offers or things like that, I want to paint a broad picture, because I think that as we've talked, there's so many facets to this multi-cloud world. There's no one size fits all here. But to us, really, there are a few important constructs that as we think about our innovation and where we are focused on, where we've done recent product introductions as recently as January, or even if you look at if you try to paint a trend line across what we've been doing in the space over the last few years, this is the picture that I'd like to kind of clarify. It's a few factors, right? One is data, applications, and developer experience. That's the what, right? We already talked about some of those things, like in data, being able to manage data consistently wherever it is across its life cycle, right? I think that's going to be a very important part of this. Applications, being able to deploy modern container-based applications or even traditional applications in a way that kind of makes sense for the business versus something that is being dictated to the business because of technology constraints. And then on the developers front, we just talked about kind of unlocking the power of DevOps to really make developers more productive, whether it's making developers more productive directly or through IT and DevOps initiatives. So I think that's the what. The how, while this is going to be a multi-year journey for us and for the industry, I think it boils down to two really, really key facets. Right? One is this notion of IP being delivered as software and services. Right? I keep going back to that because we're no longer in in a homogeneous hardware world, if we ever were.
Right.
We're in a more and more heterogeneous hardware or infrastructure world than ever before. People think of Dell as a hardware company, and or many people think of Dell as a hardware company. That that reputation for delivering amazing infrastructure solutions is in large part because of the software that's actually part of our solutions, right? People don't buy
Right.
our high-end storage systems because we have the best hardware. I mean, a lot of that, yes, the hardware and the engineering, all of that stuff is part of the IP, but a large part of it is about the enterprise-grade services that come as part of the software IP that's built into that. And I think there's a growing realization here that uh, that there are locations or places and workloads where that IP needs to be consumed as a software. It could be some of that running in a public cloud marketplace, right? Something that a customer could provision through a public cloud marketplace and really deploy as software. We've got to be able to support that, and that's kind of what we're looking to do across all of our portfolio. Some of it could be services, right? Where Dell or one of our partners is delivering an outcome to a customer that enables the customer to kind of focus on more higher value added stuff. So software and services are an important part of ensuring that consistency across public cloud, private cloud, or on-prem, colo, and edge. Like that's just a fact of life. I think that we're going to see going more. The second part of this, other than software and service, second part of the how is the ecosystem factor, right? We just talked about it. The winners, if there are winners and losers in this multi-cloud world, if you will, are going to be more dictated. Like customers are going to choose cloud ecosystems rather than independent cloud vendors. I genuinely believe this, and so our effort over the last few years, and especially accelerating over the last few months, and you'll see this kind of an area where we're going to spend a lot of effort in, is to partner with providers and partner with ecosystem players across the stack. There's no one we don't want to partner with, whether it's hyperscalers or no kind of partner, whether it's hyperscalers, ISVs, PaaS providers, services and solution providers, resellers, all of that stuff. We want to work on behalf of the customer. We tell ourselves inside sometimes internally is that we want to be that cloud ecosystem champion, and I really think that embodies kind of the energy and the verve we feel about that mission, if you will. So that's the how, right? And if you just take a step back and say, well, why is Dell uniquely suited to kind of solve these challenges? This is not really rocket science. Really, I mean, again, I'm biased, as you know, but really, we think that there are a few salient competitive differentiators for Dell as customers consider us. It's the depth and breadth of our portfolio, the ability to provide support and technical know-how wherever customers need it. Like literally, if they need support and technical support or some sort of parts replacement, even in the wild, like I literally mean in the wild. We have an ecosystem that's been built and an amazing supply chain that has proven to be more durable than other vendors over the last 2 years. I think in an increasingly distributed multi-cloud world, that's going to be a very important factor for customers. I would argue it already has proven to be important over the last few years. And then so I think these are things that we feel very good about. All of this is again in service of that moving our customers' experience from multi-cloud by default to multi-cloud by design. We feel great about kind of the steps we've made recently in that journey. This is a long journey, right? We've got a lot of work to do on the Apex front, delivering some of our innovation in public cloud experiences as well. But we're excited about where we are in the journey. We think there's a huge opportunity for us to really help customers with their multi-cloud journey, and kind of going through the what and the how is really how we're going to make them successful.
We are in a hybrid cloud world. We're all trying to figure out multi-cloud. That's a really good thing. We're out of the drunken sailor mode of everything needs to be in the public cloud or you're going to go out of business. So we're out of the crazy zone. I do appreciate that while you talked about the vision, there's also proof. I mean, last month, you announced software and services that would actually run in the public cloud. And you also announced software and services by public cloud native companies that run on your on-prem and edge infrastructure. So, and I do believe that it's a marathon. It is not a sprint. It took about 13 years for the public cloud I don't think it's going to take that long for hybrid, to be honest with you, because a lot of the stuff that we learned in the public cloud has been really put in play for the hybrid and multi-cloud. And I think customers are being really clear on what they want. They do want a multi-cloud world. And I'm not the guy to pretend that there aren't challenges, but I'm also the person that's going to be very clear that every time I meet with somebody in Fortune 500, this is what they want.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. It is. There are things that there is a lot of consolidated learning, and the learning curve will be a little bit more compact than it was in the last few years or the last decade, if you will. But on the counterpoint, I'd say there's also this notion now of trying to figure out this whole notion, trying to figure out this I think once in a generation impact that the preponderance of edge infrastructure is going to have. Right. I think that's going to be a little bit of a wild card in terms of, how integrated is that going to be into customers' multi-cloud environments? Right? We think it should be, and it can be, but of course, there's that space is so immature and so early that it's difficult to predict where things are going to land.
Yeah. Wow. We could talk for a lot longer, but you know what? We go longer than I normally go, but it's such a great conversation that we're having here, and we'd love to have you back on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me, Pat, and really enjoyed our conversation. And thanks to everybody for listening in.
Thanks so much. So this is Pat Moorhead with More Insights and Strategy, signing off with Varun from Dell Technologies. We hope you liked what you heard. If you have any questions, let me know on Twitter. I know Varun's on Twitter as well. You can hit him up. Hit the show notes too, as well, up on our YouTube and LinkedIn videos. So with that, have a great day, morning, wherever you are, night out there. Have a good one.